she was crowned queen and exiled from her own fairy tale just as quickly. Queen Soraya of Iran rose to unimaginable glamour, only to be cast aside for a destiny she could not control. Behind the diamonds and palace walls lay heartbreak, infertility, and a lifelong exile from love and homeland. This is the tragic story of a queen who lost her crown, her marriage, and the life she was promised. From the moment of her birth, Soraya stood at the intersection of tradition and modernity, an intersection that would ultimately define her life. Her father, Khalil Esfandiari Bakhtiari, was a prominent member of the Bakhtiari tribe, one of Iran's most powerful and respected aristocratic lineages. The Bakhtiari were known not only for their noble status, but also for their historical role in Iranian politics and governance. Khalil Esfandiari Bakhtiari served as a diplomat, a position that exposed his family to international circles and modern European ideals while remaining firmly rooted in Persian identity. Through him, Soraya inherited a deep connection to Iranian heritage, tribal pride, and the expectations that accompanied noble birth. Soraya's mother, Eva Karl, was of German descent, bringing a distinctly European influence into the household. This bicultural parentage gave Soraya a unique upbringing that blended Persian customs with Western values, languages, and social refinement. From an early age, she was exposed to different ways of thinking, living, and expressing herself, an experience that would later make her both fascinating and controversial in the conservative royal environment of Iran. Growing up, Soraya was raised in a privileged and intellectually stimulating atmosphere. Her family's social standing ensured access to elite education, cultured surroundings, and refined social training. She was encouraged to appreciate literature, art, and history, while also being groomed with the grace and poise expected of a young woman from an aristocratic household. This early emphasis on elegance and discipline shaped her reserved demeanor and striking presence, traits that would later define her public image. At the same time, Soraya's childhood was marked by a sense of distance and formality. As a daughter of diplomacy and nobility, she was accustomed to moving between worlds, between Iranian tradition and European modernity, between private family life and public expectation. This duality fostered both sophistication and emotional solitude, qualities that followed her into adulthood. Her beauty, noticeable even in her youth, did not go unnoticed within elite circles. Combined with her impeccable upbringing, noble lineage, and international background, Soraya gradually emerged as an ideal candidate for life at court. By the time she reached adolescence, her name was already circulating within high society, quietly positioning her for a future far beyond an ordinary aristocratic life. In 1950, at just 18 years old, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari's life took a dramatic and irreversible turn when she was introduced to Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the young ruler of Iran. The meeting was no accident. Following his divorce from his first wife, Princess Fawzia of Egypt, the Shah was under immense pressure to remarry and produce a male heir to secure the future of the Pahlavi dynasty. Soraya's aristocratic lineage, refined education, and striking beauty made her an ideal candidate, not only as a bride, but as a symbol of a modern yet traditional Iranian monarchy. The Shah was immediately captivated by Soraya. Her quiet elegance, reserved demeanor, and cosmopolitan upbringing set her apart from the women of the royal court. Their courtship moved swiftly, guided as much by political necessity as by personal affection. Within months, the two were formally engaged, and Soraya found herself thrust from a sheltered aristocratic life into the intense scrutiny of royal expectations and global attention. On February 12, 1951, Soraya married Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in a lavish ceremony in Tehran. The wedding was an extraordinary spectacle, blending Persian imperial tradition with European royal grandeur. Soraya's wedding gown, adorned with thousands of diamonds and pearls, became instantly iconic, cementing her image as one of the most glamorous royal brides of the era. The event was widely covered by international media, transforming her overnight into a global symbol of elegance and fairy tale romance. With the marriage, Soraya officially became Queen Consort of Iran, assuming a role of immense visibility and responsibility. For the Iranian public, she embodied hope, beauty, and renewal for a monarchy seeking stability after years of political uncertainty. Crowds adored her, newspapers praised her grace, and foreign press outlets dubbed her the sad-eyed princess, captivated by her melancholic beauty and mysterious presence. Despite the grandeur surrounding her new title, Soraya's transition into queenship was far from simple. She was young, inexperienced, and suddenly bound by rigid court protocols and relentless expectations. While she represented modern sophistication to the outside world, inside the palace, she faced the isolating reality of royal life, where her primary duty was to produce an heir. Every public appearance, every gesture, and every moment of her private life was closely observed, both by the Iranian people and by international audiences. Initially, the marriage appeared affectionate and promising. The Shah showed genuine devotion to his young bride, and Soraya approached her role with seriousness and dignity. Yet beneath the celebrations and headlines lay the weight of dynastic pressure that would soon overshadow the romance that had brought them together. In 1951, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari stood at the pinnacle of power and prestige, transformed from an aristocratic young woman into the Queen of Iran. The world saw a modern royal love story unfolding, unaware that this celebrated union, born amid splendor and expectation, was already carrying the seeds of profound personal tragedy. As the early excitement of Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari's marriage to Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi faded, the reality of royal duty settled heavily upon her shoulders. Beneath the glamour and public admiration lay a single, unforgiving expectation that would come to dominate her life as Queen of Iran: the need to produce an heir. In a monarchy rooted in dynastic continuity, motherhood, specifically the birth of a male successor, was not merely personal, but political. In the first years of their marriage, there was widespread optimism that Soraya would soon conceive. Both the Iranian public and the royal court eagerly anticipated the announcement of a pregnancy, seeing it as a symbol of stability for the Pahlavi dynasty. When months passed without news, concern quietly began to replace celebration. As years went by, that concern hardened into scrutiny, speculation, and eventually pressure. Soraya underwent repeated medical examinations, both in Iran and abroad, consulting prominent doctors in Europe in hopes of finding a solution. The treatments were invasive, exhausting, and emotionally draining. Despite her youth and otherwise good health, no clear remedy emerged. Medical opinions suggested that she was unable to conceive, a conclusion that devastated Soraya and quietly altered the tone of her marriage. Within the walls of the royal palace, the issue of infertility became inescapable. Advisors, courtiers, and political elites increasingly viewed Soraya not as a beloved queen, but as a barrier to the future of the monarchy. Iran's political climate was unstable, and the absence of a clear successor was seen as a dangerous vulnerability. The pressure on the Shah to secure the dynasty intensified, and with it, the pressure on Soraya became relentless. The Shah himself was deeply conflicted. On a personal level, he was emotionally attached to Soraya and admired her loyalty and dignity. On a political level, he was acutely aware that his throne depended on continuity. Discussions began to surface about extreme solutions, including the possibility of taking a second wife or altering succession laws, ideas that deeply wounded Soraya and eroded her sense of security. For Soraya, the burden was not only public but profoundly private. She internalized the blame for her infertility, despite medical uncertainty, and struggled with feelings of inadequacy and guilt. The palace, once a place of wonder, became increasingly isolating. Surrounded by servants and ceremony, she nevertheless endured her pain largely alone, bound by expectations that allowed little room for vulnerability. The Iranian press, while initially sympathetic, began to reflect the growing tension within the court. Whispers of disappointment circulated, and Soraya's role was subtly reduced, her future quietly questioned. Each passing year without an heir deepened the rift between her public image as a glamorous queen and her private reality as a woman facing an impossible standard. By the mid-1950s, infertility was no longer a medical concern. It had become the defining issue of Soraya's queenship. The love that once bound her marriage was steadily overshadowed by dynastic necessity, placing Soraya at the center of a conflict she could neither escape nor resolve. What began as a fairy tale union was now strained by the cruel intersection of biology, tradition, and power, setting the stage for a heartbreaking outcome that would soon follow. By the late 1950s, the marriage between Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari and Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had reached a breaking point that neither affection nor loyalty could repair. What had once been celebrated as a romantic royal union was now dominated by silence, strain, and an unspoken inevitability. At the center of the crisis was a single, merciless fact. Soraya had not produced an heir, and time was running out for the Pahlavi dynasty. For the Shah, the pressure was immense. Iran's monarchy rested on fragile political ground, and the absence of a clear successor was viewed by advisors and elites as a threat to national stability. Though deeply attached to Soraya on a personal level, the Shah increasingly found himself forced to weigh his love for his wife against his duty as sovereign. By early 1958, that conflict became impossible to ignore. In private discussions, the Shah proposed solutions that revealed how far the situation had deteriorated. One suggestion was that he take a second wife solely to produce a male heir, while Soraya would retain her title and status as queen. To Soraya, this proposal was devastating. It reduced her role to a symbolic figure and asked her to sacrifice her dignity for the sake of dynastic convenience. She firmly rejected the idea, unwilling to accept a future defined by humiliation and emotional exile. Another proposal involved changing Iran's succession laws to allow the Shah's brother to inherit the throne. While politically practical, this option also placed Soraya in an impossible position. Accepting such a change would mean publicly acknowledging her failure as queen and legitimizing the very system that judged her worth solely by motherhood. Soraya resisted this solution as well, refusing to compromise her principles or accept blame for circumstances beyond her control. Her refusal placed the Shah in an agonizing dilemma. Torn between personal devotion and political necessity, he ultimately chose the survival of the monarchy. In March 1958, the marriage officially collapsed. The reason given was Soraya's childlessness, a cold and clinical explanation that masked years of emotional suffering and private grief. The divorce marked a profound personal tragedy for Soraya. She was dismissed not for betrayal, scandal, or lack of loyalty, but for a biological limitation she had tried desperately to overcome. Overnight, she lost not only her husband but her identity as Queen of Iran. The court that had once celebrated her beauty and elegance now quietly turned away, eager to move forward in search of a more suitable consort. Public reaction was deeply emotional. Many Iranians sympathized with Soraya, seeing her as a tragic figure sacrificed to tradition and power. Her quiet dignity during the separation only deepened public admiration, while reinforcing her image as a woman wronged by an unforgiving system. In 1958, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari was cast aside by history's harsh logic that a queen without a child had no place on the throne. The breakdown of her marriage was not merely the end of a relationship, but the collapse of a dream, one in which love proved powerless against dynasty and a woman's worth was measured by an heir she could never give. The aftermath of Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari's divorce was swift, unforgiving, and deeply symbolic. Almost overnight, the woman once hailed as the radiant Queen of Iran was stripped of her title, her position, and her place within the nation's official memory. The revocation of her queenly status marked not only a political decision, but a profound personal erasure, transforming Soraya from a reigning consort into an exile. With no role remaining for her in Iran, Soraya was compelled to leave the country she had once represented on the world stage. She departed quietly, without ceremony or public farewell, a stark contrast to the grandeur that had surrounded her arrival as a young bride just years earlier. Her first refuge was Germany, where she stayed with her parents, seeking emotional shelter in familiar surroundings after the trauma of rejection and loss. Yet even there, the weight of her past followed her, inseparable from her identity. In Iran, the process of erasing Soraya from public life began almost immediately. Official photographs were removed from palaces and public buildings. Her portraits disappeared from newspapers, publications, and state imagery that had once celebrated her elegance and symbolic role. The monarchy carefully rewrote its visual and historical narrative, clearing space for the Shah's future wife and a renewed emphasis on dynastic continuity. Soraya's absence was not merely physical, it was institutional, deliberate, and absolute. This systematic removal deepened Soraya's sense of displacement. She was no longer just a divorced woman, but a former queen without a country. The nation she had served, endured scrutiny for, and sacrificed her personal happiness to, now treated her as though she had never existed. For Soraya, this rejection was more devastating than the divorce itself. It confirmed that her value within the monarchy had always been conditional, defined by her ability to produce an heir rather than by her loyalty or humanity. After a period in Germany, Soraya gradually settled in Western Europe, spending much of her time in Paris. The city offered anonymity, culture, and a degree of freedom she had never known as queen. Yet beneath the cosmopolitan lifestyle, exile remained a wound that never fully healed. She moved through elite European circles as a glamorous figure, but without a fixed identity, too royal to be ordinary, too discarded to belong anywhere fully. During the 1960s and 1970s, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari's life in exile unfolded as a quiet struggle between public glamour and private emptiness. Living primarily in Western Europe, especially in Paris and Italy, she remained a figure of fascination, photographed, admired, and whispered about, yet deeply isolated from any lasting sense of purpose or belonging. Stripped of her royal role and unable to return to Iran, Soraya drifted through elite social circles while carrying the emotional weight of rejection, loss, and unrealized hopes. Despite her beauty and international profile, Soraya found exile profoundly lonely. She had been raised to be a queen, not to build an independent life from nothing. The routines of royal duty that once structured her days were gone, replaced by long stretches of solitude. Friends and acquaintances came and went, but few relationships offered stability or emotional depth. The sense of being permanently unanchored, too famous to disappear, too displaced to belong, haunted her daily life. In an effort to reinvent herself, Soraya briefly pursued a career in acting, hoping that artistic expression might provide meaning and independence. Her striking appearance attracted attention in European cinema, and she appeared in a small number of films during the 1960s. While the roles brought momentary excitement and a sense of novelty, they failed to deliver lasting fulfillment. Acting, like society life, proved to be another distraction rather than a true replacement for the identity she had lost. It was during this period that Soraya met Franco Indovina, an Italian film director whose intellect, passion, and warmth offered her something she had long been denied: emotional connection free from political obligation. Their relationship was intense and deeply personal, marked by affection, companionship, and the promise of a future shaped by choice rather than duty. With Indovina, Soraya experienced a version of love unburdened by royal expectations, and for a time she appeared genuinely hopeful. That fragile sense of happiness was shattered in 1972, when Indovina was killed in a plane crash. The sudden loss devastated Soraya emotionally, reopening wounds she had never fully healed from her divorce and exile. Indovina's death deprived her not only of a partner, but of the last meaningful anchor in her life. Those close to her later noted that she never fully recovered from the shock, retreating further into emotional isolation. In the years that followed, Soraya maintained a visible presence at social events, fashion gatherings, and elite functions, her elegance intact but her spirit visibly subdued. Behind the poised exterior was a woman grappling with grief, regret, and a growing sense of irrelevance. She lived comfortably, yet without joy, admired, yet profoundly alone. In her later memoirs, Soraya reflected candidly on this period, describing a life defined by waiting, loss, and longing. She acknowledged that exile had robbed her not only of a country and crown, but of the chance to form a family or define herself on her own terms. The melancholy that colored her words revealed a woman acutely aware of what might have been. In 1991, more than 3 decades after losing her crown and country, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari gave voice to a lifetime of silence with the publication of her memoir, Le Palais des Solitudes, The Palace of Loneliness. The book was not written as a royal chronicle or political defense, but as a deeply personal meditation on identity, love, exile, and the emotional cost of being cast aside by history. Through its pages, Soraya finally reclaimed her own narrative, no longer as a queen defined by duty, but as a woman shaped by loss. The title itself captured the essence of her life after divorce. Though she had once lived in grand palaces surrounded by ceremony, Soraya described a far more enduring structure, a private palace built of isolation, memory, and emotional distance. In her memoir, loneliness was not portrayed as a temporary condition, but as a permanent companion, one that followed her from Tehran to Europe and lingered long after public fascination had faded. Soraya wrote candidly about the collapse of her marriage and the trauma of rejection for being childless. She reflected on how the divorce shattered not only her relationship with the Shah, but her sense of self-worth. Raised to believe that her value lay in fulfilling a role, she struggled to redefine herself once that role was taken away. The loss of her title, homeland, and future as a mother created a void that no amount of wealth or admiration could fill. Beyond personal grief, Soraya's memoir revealed a philosophical depth shaped by years of introspection. She contemplated exile as a psychological state rather than merely a physical displacement. Living in Europe, she felt suspended between worlds, unable to return to Iran, yet never fully belonging elsewhere. This sense of emotional homelessness, she wrote, was more painful than material loss, leaving her permanently detached from any lasting sense of purpose. Her reflections on love were particularly poignant. Soraya acknowledged moments of passion and connection, especially her relationship with Franco Indovina, yet admitted that happiness always felt fragile, fleeting, and shadowed by impermanence. Love, for her, was never allowed to grow into stability, repeatedly interrupted by fate, politics, or death. The plane crash that killed Indovina remained an unhealed wound, symbolizing the final collapse of hope for a shared future. Throughout Le Palais des Solitudes, Soraya did not seek pity. Instead, her tone was restrained, melancholic, and introspective, revealing a woman who had learned to endure rather than overcome. She questioned whether freedom without belonging could ever be fulfilling, and whether a life stripped of its original meaning could truly be rebuilt. These reflections gave the memoir a universal resonance, extending beyond royalty to anyone who has experienced rejection or displacement. During the final decades of her life, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari continued to embody a refined elegance that never fully deserted her, even as time and loss reshaped her world. From the 1980s until her death in 2001, she lived primarily in Paris, occupying a chic apartment on the prestigious Avenue Montaigne, a location synonymous with fashion, luxury, and old-world sophistication. To the outside world, Soraya appeared to have preserved a life of grace and comfort, moving effortlessly through select social circles that still regarded her as royalty in spirit, if not in title. She remained a recognizable figure within European high society, occasionally appearing at cultural events, fashion gatherings, and private salons frequented by aristocrats, artists, and intellectuals. Her poise, soft-spoken manner, and legendary beauty continued to draw admiration. For many, she represented a bygone era of glamour, a former queen who carried her past with quiet dignity rather than bitterness. Yet these public moments were carefully controlled, brief interludes in a life increasingly defined by withdrawal. Beneath the polished exterior lay a persistent solitude. Friends and acquaintances later recalled that Soraya's social life was more ritual than refuge. While she attended select events, she often returned alone to her apartment, where silence replaced conversation and memory filled the spaces once occupied by purpose. The contrast between her elegant surroundings and emotional isolation was stark. Surrounded by art, fine furnishings, and reminders of her past, she nevertheless lived with a profound sense of disconnection. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 had permanently severed any remaining ties to her former homeland. With the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty, the possibility of reconciliation with Iran vanished entirely. Soraya was no longer merely a divorced queen in exile, but a woman without a country to return to, her role in Iran's history suspended in a political past that no longer existed. This final rupture deepened her sense of being unmoored, reinforcing the emotional exile that had begun decades earlier. Despite maintaining financial security and public respect, Soraya's later years lacked the intimacy of close family life or lasting companionship. She never remarried and had no children, a reality that echoed painfully through her advancing age. The absence of personal continuity, no partner, no descendants, no homeland, lent her life a quiet fragility. Those who knew her described long periods of seclusion, punctuated by reflective moods and a gentle melancholy that never fully lifted. Yet Soraya did not seek attention or sympathy. She lived with restraint, preserving her privacy and avoiding public commentary. Her identity remained complex, admired, remembered, yet fundamentally alone. Even in Paris, the city that had offered her refuge, she remained an outsider, recognized, but not rooted. On October 25, 2001, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari died quietly at the age of 69 in her Paris apartment, bringing to an end a life that had once unfolded on the world's most dazzling stage and later receded into near silence. The circumstances of her death reflected the defining pattern of her later years: discreet, solitary, and largely removed from public view. No detailed medical explanation was ever formally confirmed, and reports simply noted that the cause of death remained undisclosed, reinforcing the sense of mystery that had long surrounded her private life. Soraya passed away alone, without close family at her side. For a woman who had once been surrounded by courtiers, dignitaries, and constant attention, her final moments underscored the profound isolation that had followed her since exile. Paris, the city that had offered refuge and anonymity after her fall from queenship, also became the place where her long emotional journey came to rest. The elegant apartment on Avenue Montaigne, once a symbol of independence and refined withdrawal, became the setting of her quiet departure. News of her death spread with a muted solemnity. While she was no longer a political figure, her passing stirred reflection among those who remembered her as the beautiful young queen of Iran, cast aside for reasons beyond her control. Obituaries focused less on scandal or power and more on tragedy, emphasizing how her life had been shaped by rejection, childlessness, and exile. Many described her as a symbol of a vanished era, a royal figure undone not by ambition or controversy, but by fate. The poignancy of Soraya's death was intensified by what followed just 1 week later. Her younger brother, who had been among her last close relatives and emotional anchors, also died shortly after her passing. The near simultaneous loss of the two siblings cast a somber shadow over her final chapter, reinforcing the sense that Soraya's world had gradually narrowed until almost nothing remained. With his death, the small circle of family that had sustained her through decades of displacement effectively vanished. Soraya left behind no spouse and no children. Her lineage, once intertwined with imperial destiny, ended quietly, without continuation. This absence echoed the very reason she had lost her crown decades earlier, giving her life a tragic circularity. The inability to produce an heir had cost her a throne. The absence of family accompanied her at the end. In death, as in life, Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari occupied a space between grandeur and solitude. She was mourned by admirers, remembered by historians, and reclaimed briefly by public memory, yet her final moments belonged only to herself. Her passing closed the story of a woman who had known extraordinary privilege and profound abandonment, leaving behind an enduring image, a former queen whose life, stripped of power and belonging, ended in the same quiet loneliness that had defined its final decades. Soraya Esfandiari Bakhtiari's final farewell took place on the 6th of November, 2001 in Paris, the city that had served as her refuge for more than 4 decades. Her funeral was held at the American Cathedral of the Holy Trinity, an understated yet dignified setting that reflected both her international life and her quiet withdrawal from public power. The ceremony, solemn and restrained, stood in stark contrast to the glittering royal events that had once defined her existence. In attendance were members of the Pahlavi family, representatives of European aristocracy, and a small circle of acquaintances who had remained connected to Soraya in her later years. Their presence acknowledged her former status as Queen of Iran, yet the gathering was notably modest, lacking the pageantry traditionally associated with royalty. There were no state honors, no national mourning, and no official Iranian representation, an absence that spoke volumes about the political and historical rupture that had erased her from the country she once served. The funeral service emphasized reflection rather than grandeur. Prayers, music, and readings honored Soraya not as a political figure, but as a woman whose life had been shaped by loss, exile, and emotional endurance. Those who attended later described the atmosphere as deeply melancholic, marked by an awareness that Soraya's story had never found resolution. She was remembered less for power than for tragedy, a former queen whose crown had been taken, but whose dignity remained intact. Following the ceremony in Paris, Soraya was laid to rest in Westfriedhof Cemetery in Munich, Germany, the city where her parents were buried and where she had spent parts of her life both before and after her queenship. She was interred alongside her father, mother, and younger brother, reuniting her in death with the family that had provided her last sense of belonging. The burial site, quiet and far removed from royal capitals, reflected the deeply personal nature of her final resting place. That Soraya was buried in Germany rather than Iran underscored the lasting consequences of her exile. Despite once being crowned Queen of Iran, she never returned to her homeland, neither in life nor in death. Political realities and historical shifts had made such a return impossible, sealing her separation from the nation that had defined and rejected her. Her burial abroad symbolized the permanence of that estrangement. The conclusion of Soraya's life stood in poignant contrast to its beginning. Born into aristocracy, elevated to queenship amid international celebration, she ended her journey far from the throne, in quiet anonymity. There was no dynasty to mourn her, no country to claim her, only memory and history to preserve her name. What do you think about Queen Soraya? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.